Okay, guys, here we are again. We are on the last lesson for the Cuban Missile Crisis. We have looked at the build-up, how the crisis happened, and how it was resolved. So today, what we are going to be looking at is the implications, okay, and the aftermath of the crisis. Aftermath means what happens after everything has ended, okay. So that is what we are going to do now. We are on chapter 3.3. There are three main points that we are going to look at. We should be this. Sorry, wrong notes. This one, okay. This should be the page of the notes you are at. Okay. The first thing we're going to look at is all the countries. You have this big table here. What I would suggest you do is listen to the lecture, read through your textbook. After that, fill this up in point form so that you can use it as a kind of review. All right. So let's go back to the content itself. So we know that the Cuban Missile Crisis, we know it is the high point, right? High point of tensions. This is the closest that the world has ever gotten to the end of the world. So of course, naturally, after that, people will start to calm down. They realize that this is a mistake, so we must do something about it. Okay. So, what are the implications that we are going to look at? We are going to look at the reputation of the leader. So, in this way, we are looking at personal, okay, the foreign policy and geopolitical concerns. So, affects the political and the national, okay. So, how is each country affected? And one of the other questions we need to ask is who won the Cuban Missile Crisis? Okay, who benefited? How did they benefit? Okay, we're going to look at it country by country. So let's have a look at the USA in these three areas. So how was Kennedy seen? Remember, Kennedy comes out of the crisis, and it is seen that he has managed to get the Soviets to give in to his demands. Okay, so is it a win for him? Yes. Okay, so this is in the greater political sphere. Okay, at the same time, remember, there were some players in the American government who were more hardline, more aggressive. They don't mind using the nuclear weapons. Okay, but Kennedy is able to defuse the conflict without risking any kind of nuclear warfare. Okay, so this is good for him. It is, shall we say, it is a win for Kennedy. It is also a win for the world because it allows him to pursue nuclear disarmament later. Okay, so Kennedy did come out of the Cuban Missile Crisis on high note. Okay, how about its allies? Okay, remember we had already looked at the reaction of the other allies such as the UK, and we know that the European nations had already been living under the threat of nuclear warfare, and so we already know that they think that the American objection was unreasonable. Okay, so it's a small negative. Okay, at the same time, NATO member states disapprove of the removal of the missile, so they feel that the protection has been taken away. But honestly, all these are relatively minor in terms of the negative impact. Why? Let us remember that which is the anchor nation of NATO. Okay, we know that the USA is the anchor nation. That is to say, it carries the most weight. Okay, it is the force behind NATO itself. Okay. Nevertheless, remember, what does the USA want? The USA wants their sphere of influence to be clean of communism, right? So the fact is that Cuba is still in their sphere of influence. Okay. And so there is a communist nation in their so-called backyard. So that is a negative for them. Okay. So that's for the USA. So a question to think about overall. Okay, did they benefit or did they lose out? Okay, what are the categorizations? Okay, this is something that you need to think about. Okay, you can put it onto your I will put it here, maybe at the side, okay, or something like that. there's an overall evaluation. You could say something about overall evaluation. Okay, you do need to come to a conclusion about this. You need to come to a conclusion about this for all three countries. Okay. So next one, we are looking at the Soviet Union. Okay, we know we have Khrushchev. Khrushchev, remember, did not come out of the crisis looking good. Okay, he must think of it from the perspective of the international public. He was forced to remove the missiles. Okay, so it made him seem weak. Okay, and at the same time, because remember China and Cuba, both of them were very aggressive, and so they saw that, hey, the Soviets, you back down. How can you do this? Okay, so again, negative. Okay, but what is negative for the for the USSR is good for the. What is bad for USA is good for the USSR. That is why here, Cuba still remains an ally. Okay. An important thing to take note, the one last point that I have here, where the threat of the Jupiter missiles, okay, or rather what I want to say is that the perceived threat. Remember, the Jupiter missiles were obsolete, okay? So if they're obsolete, is it a win for is it a win for Khrushchev or not? That is something you need to consider, okay? Finally, we have Cuba. Cuba, obviously, he says, wow, he is still a hero, right? Because everybody sees that, whoa, Castro, not scared, will die for his country, not afraid to stand up to the USA, okay? So that's good. But we also see that if you look at the second column, which is about relationship with the allies, it's allies lah, okay? That means the USSR. They felt that the USSR had kind of betrayed them. Why? Because the protections have been removed, right? But what is the reality of the situation? They have to be a Soviet ally, right? This is the reality. If they do not be a Soviet ally, they will get eaten by the USA. They have to be. Okay, so Castro can complain all he wants, but he must continue to be an ally of the USSR. Okay? So they did lose the nuclear protection, but that's fine because the whole point of the nuclear protection, what was the purpose of it? It is to stop American invasion, right? And they succeeded. So in a sense, is Cuba safer than it was before? Previously, it faced the threat of American invasion. Now they don't. So I would say that's an overall win. Okay? So we need to look at the three different actors in the crisis. Now we are moving on to the second point about the establishment of the hotline. What is this hotline? We are now looking at global implications. Okay? How does it affect the Cold War altogether? Okay, now we know that when we looked at the content, when we look at how the crisis unfolded, we know that one of the problems was that there was no good means of communication, right? All it takes is, you all play broken telephone. One person passes a message to the next. By the time it comes to the next person, it will get garbled. So message A can become message B. Okay, and that's when we are playing some like orientation game. But when it becomes an issue of nuclear missiles, right, then that it becomes very different. Okay, so Kennedy and Khrushchev, what is the solution? There is a solution. There is a hotline between the White House and the Kremlin. So this is obviously where the US president is, right? What is the Kremlin? Please remember what the Kremlin is. This is the Soviet equivalent. It is where the premier sits. Okay, please recognize it in SBQ. You must know what is the Kremlin. Okay, so literally there's a telephone where Khrushchev can pick up the phone and he can talk to Kennedy, or Kennedy will pick up the phone and he'll talk to Khrushchev. Okay, so quick and honest information transfer. It is speedy. So very simple. Think about it. If there is more communication, what does that mean about the crisis? Okay, there is an improvement in their relationship. Why? Because if you and I, we just know each other, maybe there's some miscommunication, so maybe our relationship is 5 upon 10. But if we can speak honestly, say I expect this of you and you expect this of me, and we can agree, we can compromise, then obviously our relationship is getting better. Okay, so how does it affect the Cold War? The Cold War, shall we say, it thaws. Okay, people like to use this metaphor. It is cold, so when it's getting better, it's not so cold. Okay, as in the relationship between them is not so cold. Okay. And finally, we have this thing called nuclear disarmament. We have seen it before, right? World War One, Treaty of Versailles. We have the disarmament of Germany, but now we have nuclear disarmament. What does it mean? It means that we stop producing nuclear weapons. We put them down. Okay, is this good? This is very good. Why? Less nuclear weapons is good for the world. Okay, so an important example here is the Limited Test Ban Nuclear Treaty. Limited Test Ban Treaty. What is it? This is proof of cooperation. This is a great piece of evidence to show that something good did come out of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Okay, so it marks a step that, okay, we need to control how we use our nuclear weapons, how we develop them, so on and so forth. Okay. However, we must note that it is limited. So is it a total stop on nuclear weapons? Of course not lah. Okay, but there is, at least there's some step being made. One is better than none. Okay. However, if you look at the second point here, we know that Kennedy was assassinated and Khrushchev was forced out of office, and therefore their initial efforts did not bear much fruit. Okay. And in fact, they will build up in the next chapter. We'll see in the early 1980s, right? The threat of nuclear war will raise its head again. Okay. Nevertheless, when we look at it, in the final analysis, it is still a first step, right? One step is better than no step, okay? And it is a positive direction. We are moving away from mutually assured destruction, all right? So when we look at it, when we look at the Cuban Missile Crisis, there are a few questions to ask ourselves. Who won the Cuban Missile Crisis? Who was primarily responsible? Notice I say not who is responsible, who is primarily responsible. Okay. Who benefited from the CMC? Now, I would suggest that these are all questions that you should take some time to prepare and to think about, and that will help to equip you well for the O levels. Alright, okay, so we will stop here. Again, remember, if you have any questions, please go and ask your teachers, go and clarify in class. Okay, and that is the end of the Cuban Missile Crisis.